Chapter 3. And he shewed me Joshua the high priest, standing before the angel of the Lord, and Satan standing at his right hand to resist him. And the Lord said unto Satan, The Lord rebuke thee, O Satan, even the Lord that hath chosen Jerusalem rebuke thee. Is not this a brand plucked out of the fire? Now Joshua was clothed with filthy garments, and stood before the angel. And he answered and spake unto those that stood before him, saying, Take away the filthy garments from him. And unto him he said, Behold, I have caused thine iniquity to pass from thee, and I will clothe thee with change of raiment. And I said, Let them set a fair mitre upon his head. So they set a fair mitre upon his head, and clothed him with garments. And the angel of the Lord stood by. And the angel of the Lord protested unto Joshua, saying, Thus saith the Lord of hosts, If thou wilt walk in my ways, and if thou wilt keep my charge, then thou shalt also judge my house, and shalt keep my courts, and I will give thee places to walk among these that stand by. Hear now, O Joshua the high priest, thou and thy fellows that sit before thee, for they are men wondered at. For behold, I will bring forth my servant the branch. For behold, the stone that I have laid before Joshua, upon one stone shall be 7 eyes. Behold, I will engrave the graving thereof, saith the Lord of hosts, and I will remove the iniquity of that land in one day. In that day, saith the Lord of hosts, shall ye call every man his neighbor under the vine and under the fig tree. Although most of us don't think of it that way, we have grown up being taught in school in the Greek logic tradition, where we establish all the groundwork facts first and build from there. If we were in Middle Eastern tradition, we would simply have an introduction to a basic fact, usually a fact we would well understand, and then that would be used as an introduction to whatever the speaker wanted to talk about. And here we have that sort of same thing. We are using, we're in the initial part of this, Joshua as the high priest and filthy garments and all kinds of other things. None of it seems to make a whole lot of sense, but it all does if you understand something beyond the traditional Greek logic here. Joshua is being used as an example here, but there's a little development happen. All of the people who Zechariah was talking to would know who Joshua was, and Joshua would have been referred to by them as the high priest. Now, in really technical, accurate terms, the Lord would have called him the presiding priest. Okay? He was a member of the Aaronic, also known as Levitical, Levites, the Levitical priesthood. High priest is a totally different office, and it is the top presiding office in all of the offices of the priesthood. In the offices of the priesthood of God, at the top, you have the prophet. And then underneath the prophet, you have the calling of apostle, which we get to deal with in the New Testament. We don't get to deal with that in the Old Testament because we don't have the high priesthood in the Old Testament. We do because Jesus is a high priest and he calls people to assist him, and they are apostles. They're special witnesses. Then we have the 70, and then we have the elders. And those are all the offices in the higher priesthood, also referred to as Melchizedek priesthood, Melchizedek being the presiding high priest in the time of Abraham. And because Abraham paid tithes to this. There's a lot of stuff that is just left out because they assumed that the people that they were talking to would know, but we don't know. And then many of the books that would have explained this are just left out of the Bible altogether. So there's a lot of stuff we don't know. In the priesthood that Joshua would have been a participant in, that was called the Aaronic priesthood or the Levitical priesthood. There was the office of the priest, and there was the office of the teacher, and there was the office of the deacon, and those people who served in the temple were called priests. And you had the priests, and then you had the presiding priest, who was also referred to colloquially as the high priest. Joshua was the high priest. In Hebrew, Joshua's name is Yeshua. In English, the same name means Jesus. And in the dualistic prophecy that Zechariah is giving us, Joshua, the high priest, presiding priest in the temple, is being used as a symbol or to represent the coming high priest of the higher priesthood in the later days, which was Jesus the Christ. And the filthy garments that Joshua would wear, he would wear in his function as the high priest on the Day of Atonement. He wouldn't wear filthy clothes. It was just he would assume the sins of the people on the Day of Atonement, present himself before the Lord, and the sins would be transferred to the sacrificial goat, and then the sins of Israel would be cast away and no more. In the Savior's time, the Savior being the high priest, real high priest, would take upon himself the sins of the world, and the sins would be taken away from the world. The symbolism here is absolutely beautiful and incredible, but it's hard if this is the first time you've run across this, it's hard to sort of get you to understand the parallelism. On one hand, we have the lower form of it as represented in the original Aaronic and Levitical priesthood, which is what Joshua, the presiding priest, had in the temple, and that magnificent, elevated, higher, all-encompassing priesthood held by the Savior of the world, who both are going through the same sort of thing, whereas Joshua the man is going through it symbolically, hopefully to teach the people that the stuff the Savior was going to do was coming. They never got the message. And so Joshua, the presiding priest, is symbolic of everything that the Savior is trying to do. It's amazing. The second part of this that is really interesting is that the statement of Israel is a brand plucked out of the fire. Well, the fire was Babylon, and Israel was a brand, which was a burning part still, and it was rescued from the fire of Babylon. Because Babylon was in the desert, but it was also culturally and religiously a disaster for the Jews, because everything that they were supposed to avoid was there in their face. In verses 3 to 5, as it's talking about the filthy garments, these again are, the filthy garments are symbolically representative of sin, and doing away with the old dirty, filthy garments and putting on the new was symbolic of repenting of evil, repenting of the sins that you had committed, and putting on a new life, being baptized, repenting of the sins, or repenting of the sins actually first, and then being baptized, and going forward. And these were not, of course, symbolic. These were not Joshua's own clothes that were dirty. They were not his sins. They were the filthy garments that are talked about are representations of the sins of the people, which he, as the high priest, symbolically bore before the Lord on the Day of Atonement, and that were subsequently gotten rid of. That's an amazing, amazing set of parallels. And these were all in place from the time of Moses. And 1,000 years, people never got the message.